Hello again, everyone. I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the marketing and strategy firm, the Harbinger Group. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most crucial communications issues that CEOs are facing right now. With the world changing rapidly due to technological advancements, the pandemic changing the rules of how we do business, and the very real fear of layoffs at many, many companies, communications has become more important than ever for CEOs.
That's absolutely true. And just to trying to stay ahead of everything when you're a CEO is so difficult. And so I hope that in some way, the things that we're bringing up, the issues we're bringing up today are useful to the people that will be listening to this podcast. So the key communications issue that we're going to focus on to discuss today is the need for CEOs to communicate with empathy and authenticity. In these uncertain times, many people are looking for leaders who can empathize with their struggles and concerns. CEOs who can demonstrate that they understand the challenges their employees and customers are facing will be better positioned to build trust and build loyalty. What do you say, CEO of the Harbinger Group?
Yeah, I'm just one tiny little CEO, but 100%. Um, Empathy is critical. When I look at how people talk about empathy, it varies. But I guess demonstrating understanding with challenges that people who work for you are having, that's kind of hard to do if, say, you're 20 years older than they are, right?
Right.
So I don't know that it's as much, oh, I get it, because they're not going to believe that. I equate that to, my parents telling me they understand what I'm going through or was going through, say, when I was raising kids in an extraordinarily different era, right? There's just a lot of years in between me and some of the people who work for us. And I know that happens in a lot of companies. But if you focus on empathy first, and that's just about recognizing tough times, recognizing that, people you work with are struggling, expressing your own appreciation for the fact that, things are hard or if things are great. That's really what it's about. It's not, in my view, necessarily the need to show them, oh yeah, I get it. Because you can't get it.
Right.
I struggle to understand even how people who work or younger folks, that I interact with all the time, how they're parenting. My oldest is 21 and youngest is 17, and those people are parenting very, very differently. And that's not that much time since I parented,
Mm-hmm.
littles. So, but it's extraordinarily different. There was just a huge article about that in the New York Times last week. And I wish I could remember the name of what it is, but this parenting style now is about being okay with being a nerd, like being in terms of, I don't care how stupid I look being dorky sitting down here with my kid on the playground who's having a total meltdown, because I want them to understand they feel supported. And I personally, that's way, way different than how I parented. And I think all the folks around me at the time parented. It's just an example.
Yeah.
You don't have to understand, but you do need to get comfortable with hearing them express themselves and demonstrating your own empathy of them being in a tough or good situation.
That's really such a key point that you're talking about. And recently I was doing a communications exercise for a client, and through various parts of their business, from the higher ups to sort of the mid managers to the folks, that were newer employees. And I was bringing up this concept. And for the people that have been in positions of power for a long time, for the people that are more our age than younger, that are part of a different generation who are like, well, when I was going up in the business, you just toughed it out and, and it's like, that's fine. And you have a great company. But if you really want to be a great company in the next 5 years, you are going to have what we're bringing up right now, which is the empathy and the authenticity. I'm not saying kumbaya the whole time and,
Mm.
let's talk about our feelings every 10 minutes. There's a lot of work to do, but there's a way you can communicate with people where they feel valued, where they feel like they're an important part of the team. And in doing so, you're going to have them run through walls for you if you do it
Mm-hmm.
correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Loyalty, and that's what many of us like to see. And granted, loyalty today might mean 4 years.
Sure.
That's a long tenure at a company, particularly for younger folks. Even if you want people to stay that long, you need to make them feel appreciated, um, particularly that their feelings and their experiences are valid and welcomed, that they can talk about stuff at work is that personal stuff, and even just the struggles they may be having, getting work done. Allowing time for that is critically important, particularly for this younger generation. I'm about to be 52, so when I say younger, that's really people like 40 on down. That's how I think of it. Like people in their 40s, I kind of figure, they're more like me than the people like under 40.
But if you're a millennial or a Gen Z,
Hmm.
to me, that's very different generations in terms of their mindset. And so they may be hovering around 40 or almost 40 or whatever the case may be. And now they're in positions of authority, but they are wired quite a bit differently. And if you're 52 or 55 or
Hmm.
position of authority and you don't understand that, you're going to get left behind. You can run your business however you want to. We're not sitting here saying you have to do it this way because this is the way to do it. We're saying if you do it this way, you're going to have a far greater success ratio than if you don't do it.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah. One other thing I want to just layer in here, I think it's a fit for this topic, is I've recently been exposed to um, situations, particularly folks who are just entering the workforce. So this is like in the 21, 22 ish range of professional. There are so many gaps in communication skills, social skills that exist that are absolutely not their fault. That
Oh, for sure.
you have to pay attention to and help them develop. Because in the last 3 years, the world was totally different. Those were pinnacle years in professional development, whether it was, they were not able to have in-person internships as undergrads, or had very limited interaction, with human beings. Those things have impacted these people, and they've also been through very tough times at a very young age. So appreciating that if you want to have successful teams, bring in the resources to help everybody shore up any of their own skill gaps in the communications area, and then coaching for managers to understand how to work with them most effectively. So I'm just throwing that out there as something to keep in mind,
It's
that would be helpful as companies, as leaders of companies really are focused on growth. You're not going to be able to do that if you don't have people who are able to communicate effectively. And certainly your younger workforce is going to need a little help in that regard.
I'm so glad you brought that up because you tee that up with professional development, which is what a lot of companies say. Hey, we need to have professional development. So I'm just going to put a fine point on it. Imagine you're 21 or 22 or 23, and you get hired at your company, and it's a great company. And in the past, you've had maybe a mentor program or some sort of development program where you could see how the job was done. You're part of a team, you're part of a group, and you're learning as you're doing. And imagine all of a sudden you get this new job and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm working at this great firm and everything is remote. It's not at all in person. You don't see people. So imagine that you're going through that and you're craving that, not only craving it, but needing the professional development. And you're a young person and you're doing it remotely. So I would just say, just to put a fine point on what you were saying, as it related to that, that just imagine that. Imagine how hard that is to have gone through that. And then they get back in the building and it's like, this is great. And they're wide eyed and they're like, oh my gosh. But they had to, a lot of people that came up during the pandemic had to do it in a far different way. And it didn't do them any favors. So if you can do
Yeah.
them favors now, please do it.
I use this expression a lot in talking to people at work. We don't know what we don't know. And so these folks who we're describing right now, they may not even realize that they have some deficits in these areas.
Oh, they don't. They don't.
But if
No,
you
I
want
mean
them to
mostly.
succeed as their manager, as a leader of a company that you own, and I know you do, just think about bringing in some professional assistance to help shore up those, assess and then shore up those gaps that might exist. It's going to be,
Right
we're all
on.
going to be better off for it
Yeah, sure.
because it's not their fault.
It is not.
Not at all. Just as we're having conversations about how to shore up education gaps in, preschool through elementary and high school, that these so many people were negatively impacted and didn't learn at the pace that we typically do, and there's a lot of regression. We need
On
to
the
do some
next
shoring up of
episode of
all of
Can
that.
You Hear Me?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're moving on to authenticity, which is equally important
Yeah, it is.
to empathy and demonstrating, that you appreciate the positions that people are coming from, because people really want to know that their leaders are being honest and transparent. That's a word that came up a whole lot in a couple episodes that we've done talking to younger folks about what they want in their areas of employment. They want transparency. So to do that, you got to be willing to share good news, bad news, admitting when you made a mistake, take responsibility, for all of it, the good and the bad. But first and foremost, let's just agree authenticity, being authentic in how you communicate, that's about being genuine and true to who you really are.
Right.
Because everybody knows when somebody's being fake or insincere, and that just erodes trust and confidence. So, I'm not saying go force yourself to be authentic and transparent. No, learn how you can genuinely be authentic and transparent, some in a way that feels right to you and fits with your personality, because that's when people will hear what you're saying, believe what you're saying. So that takes some work, but if you're not there yet as a leader, I would put that on a priority list. Go
And then,
and dwell in who are you and what feels right when I communicate, and keep leaning on that.
and as somebody that coaches CEOs, and I know you do the same, it's not, I did TV for a long time. So my presentation skills, like, oh gosh, it looks like he's done that before. I'm always telling them, I don't want you to be like me. I don't want you to parrot anything I'm doing. I want you to be authentic to you. I
Mhm.
want you to be a good communicator in the context of who you are. So you don't look at somebody and go, I want to have a podcast or a show or just like them. It's like,
Mhm.
well, no, you want to have a good show, but you want it to be authentic to you. And so that's the point I want to drive home here with everybody. Is it's not like looking and seeing, hey, I want to be like Tony Robbins. He's such a great motivational speaker. It's like, yeah, but that's not who you are.
Yeah.
You need to know who you are. Some people are introverts. So if you're an introvert, how do you express yourself where you can get your message across and where people and you have impact with the people that you're managing?
Yeah. I know we've done a couple early on episodes about CEO brand and how you establish that
Love
and kind
those.
of
Yep.
what is my platform? So we'll drop links to those in the show notes here if you want a refresher. And we'll also, I think this is a note to us, Rob, let's take another look at how we can um, dedicate an episode or two in year 3, now that we're in it, to how leaders, what's the work you do to establish your own true brand in your leadership position, and how that connects to and supports your corporate brand and messaging. Let's revisit that. I think it's a good one to go back
I
to.
do too, because the last time we did that was 2 years ago
Yeah.
in the late summer and fall. And so it's been
Hmm.
2 years. And I can't tell you how many times I referenced those episodes when I'm just either talking to clients or whether I'm talking to people in general about, hey, you should listen to that if you're thinking about what you should be thinking about when it comes to CEO brand.
Yeah.
To your point, Eileen, I think it's a great idea that we revisit it in the next couple of months, because it's been 2 years and it's worth revisiting, because I always reference
Hmm.
those episodes because they're so relevant, I think, to the kind of managing that people are doing in this day and age.
Yeah. And you got to start from a rock solid foundation. So we'll do that on a future episode, very near future episode.
Note to self, note to
There
self.
you go.
So one of the challenges that CEOs face in communicating with empathy and authenticity, as we've been talking about, is the need to balance the needs of different stakeholders. So CEOs need to communicate effectively with their employees, their customers, investors,
Mhm.
other stakeholders, and sometimes those needs may be in conflict. But by being clear about their values and their priorities, and by communicating those clearly and consistently, CEOs can help build trust and understand across all stakeholders. And so the point we're making is sometimes you want to have a clear, consistent message with who you are and what you stand for and what your brand stands for. But sometimes it's delivered maybe a little bit differently depending on who the stakeholder is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just prioritizing kind of a hierarchy of your messaging makes a ton of sense. Necessary. Yeah, there's a lot of times where you got to flex and be sensitive to the people who are either in front of you or just on the receiving end of your message and recognize, all right, well, in this regard, I need to temper it just a bit. The
Mm-hmm.
information is the same, and I'm not altering the facts in any way. I'm just delivering it perhaps in a different hierarchy or using some softer words. You just got to appreciate who's on the receiving end.
And think about how you're communicating internally versus externally, and just think about that just in general. It's going to
Mhm.
be quite a bit different. You're going to have your messaging and you're going to have your priorities, but some of the times the way you communicate that internally to everybody is going to differ quite a bit from the way you express it externally. Even though you have consistent messaging, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure. And the order in which the information is
Yeah,
put out is also critically important. Believe it or not, I thought,
yeah.
we'd all learned by now because it had been hammered into our heads over the last couple decades that you never share anything externally before you've shared it internally because your internal folks are those who make it all happen,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
by not
You,
sharing it with them at the same time or before, you're communicating that they're not as important to you,
you
right?
got to have
But
buy-in. If you don't have
Mhm.
buy-in from them, nothing's going to happen. You got to
Mhm.
sell it internally before you go anywhere else.
And lately, I've seen some missteps where, surprisingly, the step of, all right, let's think about our own people, the people who make it happen. How are they going to feel about this? Let's make sure we deliver it to them, even if it's a few minutes before. That's
And that's being
fine. But
ignored.
making
And I
sure
mean,
you're giving them that priority.
the instance you're talking about, it's being ignored, which I think is a huge mistake.
Yeah, or just forgotten, not treated. Maybe it's this urge to share externally because that feels like you are marketing. You're sharing
Mm.
success, you know. Well, gosh, if you haven't told it to your folks inside, they don't know that it's coming, then how possibly can you expect that they'll engage with the content and share it authentically on your social platforms or any other number of scenarios? So, just a nice reminder that order in terms of those stakeholders and how you share information out is also really important. And don't forget that.
It might sound obvious, but I had a client recently to the point you're just making, and I was doing some seminars with some of the employees, some of the higher up folks, and they were saying sometimes the top folks will just release something, and they'll be in a meeting. It's like, and here's what we're doing. And
Huh.
aside from the fact that it can be, you might feel disrespected by it. Maybe more importantly, the feedback that I was getting was, then they want me to talk about it intelligently. I didn't know it was happening, or I knew we were thinking about it internally. I didn't know we were going to go tell the world about it. And then here
Yeah.
we are at an external meeting and we're telling the world about it. And they're looking at, executive A going, and what do you think about that, Rob?
Yeah.
And they're, they're not prepared. And, and when it comes to being aligned and having that messaging discipline, you, that's a reason it's not a good idea. So we've just pointed out two reasons that's not good. And so let's move on to another important factor. It's not just the message you're delivering, it's the ability to listen. Communication is a two-way street. So CEOs need to be willing to listen to feedback and input from their stakeholders and to incorporate that into their decision-making process. So effective communication is not just about talking, because we've been talking about it the entire episode. It's also about listening. And CEOs who can create a culture of open and honest communication will be better positioned to succeed in today's rapidly changing world. What say you, Eileen?
I completely agree. It kind of touches back even on the point about reflection and planning and space for contemplation and consideration. That's listening is a huge part of that, and it's a very important aspect of leading, right? I have one client who I love this. They have a motto, I guess. Maybe that's not right, but they are comfortable with being uncomfortable to a degree that until they have agreement, until they have alignment, they're going to just stay there and hash it out. And that in order to do that, imagine you have to be willing to listen and open to concepts and perspectives, even if you kind of walked into the situation thinking, this is how I want it to be done. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's rare, but it's and extraordinary, but so important. And it leads to big breakthrough moments for that company. And I've started to do that myself a heck of a lot more. I'm like, you know what? I may not like this, may not be the direction that I thought we were going to take this in, but I'm going to stay here and be okay with it until we can all align. And then we'll know we're moving forward with a shared vision and understanding, and that what we're doing will be successful because everybody's on board and engaged.
And if you think about the sort of basic tenet of what we do, so we're consultants and we're going in and giving our ideas. That's what we're paid for, creativity ideas. But when you walk in there, what's if you're good at it, what's the first thing you're doing? You're like, I need to listen. What can I do? What are your pressure points? What can I do to help you? And it starts with listening. And as it relates to CEOs, yes, I'm bringing it back to that. You need to be the same way. You need to be able to listen. And that doesn't mean as a listener that you incorporate everything that somebody gives you. Hey, I've got 5 ideas. Does that mean you incorporate them into whatever business plan you have? That doesn't mean that. It means that you're being thoughtful and you're considering what they're saying and you're taking seriously. And that's so important with people in terms of that feeling of belonging and making sure that their opinions are valued, even if they're not acted on entirely. So that's just something I think is very important.
Yeah. Create the time and space to invite input and to listen, hear, and consider the input. I say that's a top priority for CEOs for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, all right, everybody, that's going to do it. We've just concluded our very first episode of year 3 of Can You Hear Me? I'm Eileen Rochford.
And I'm Rob Johnson. We thank you for listening. And remember, you can find Can You Hear Me wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more.